You're having a productive day. Emails answered, meetings attended, tasks ticked off. You've been moving constantly since 8 a.m. By 6 p.m., you're exhausted, genuinely tired in the way that feels earned. And then a quiet thought surfaces. What actually moved forward today? You sit with that for a moment. And the honest answer is uncomfortable. Not much. Nothing that will matter in 6 months. But you were busy. Visibly, impressively, exhaustingly busy. So why does that still feel like something? Here's what's actually happening. Your brain cannot reliably distinguish between movement and progress. It was never designed to. For most of human history, movement meant survival. Finding food, avoiding danger, building shelter. If you were moving, something was getting done. That wiring hasn't changed, but the problems have. Modern problems, career, creative, strategic, often require the opposite of motion. They require stillness, reflection, honest assessment, and the brain finds that deeply uncomfortable. So it does what brains do under discomfort. It looks for relief, and busyness is the most socially acceptable form of relief available. Let's talk about what busyness actually does inside the brain. Every time you complete a task, any task, your brain releases a small amount of dopamine, the same system that rewards eating, exercise, and social connection. The critical detail is this. The brain doesn't evaluate whether the task mattered. It just registers completion. So answering 15 emails produces 15 small dopamine hits. Clearing a to-do list feels genuinely satisfying, regardless of whether anything on that list was worth doing. It would happily reward you for color-coding a spreadsheet nobody will ever read. This is why busyness is so seductive. It provides a continuous, low-grade chemical reward for activity. Any activity. The brain doesn't ask whether you moved in the right direction. It just notices that you moved, and it rewards you for it. The result is a system that feels productive almost by design, even when nothing meaningful is being produced. Now here's where the pattern becomes more interesting. Busyness doesn't just feel like progress. For many people, it functions as a defense against something far more uncomfortable than idleness. Think about what happens when you stop. When the calendar clears and the inbox empties, and there's suddenly nothing demanding your attention. What's left? The questions you've been too busy to ask. Is this working? Am I going in the right direction? Is this what I actually want? These questions don't feel like thinking. They feel like threat, because they carry the possibility of an answer. You don't want. And so the mind, with remarkable efficiency, fills the space before those questions can form. It stays busy on purpose. Another email. Another task that didn't strictly need doing today, but creates the comfortable sensation of necessity. Busyness isn't just a productivity problem. It's often a sophisticated avoidance strategy. And the uncomfortable part is that it works. The questions stay quiet. The discomfort stays managed. And the day stays full. There's a particular version of this pattern that affects capable people most severely. For high achievers, busyness isn't just a feeling. It's an identity. Think about how we talk about busy people. Dedicated, driven, committed. And think about what we imply about people who aren't busy. Lazy, unfocused, not serious enough. So for someone who has built their sense of self around capability and effort, slowing down carries a specific psychological risk. If I'm not the person who works tirelessly, then who am I? The busyness stops being a means to an end. It becomes the end itself. This is why genuinely talented people often find themselves spinning fastest. Not because they lack discipline, but because their identity has become so entangled with the appearance of effort that stopping feels like a kind of self-erasure. They're not afraid of failure. They're afraid to stop long enough to ask whether any of it is pointed somewhere worth going. Let's make this concrete. Imagine someone building a business. Early stage. Revenue isn't where it needs to be. The response is more activity, more content, more outreach, more refinements to the website. Each move creates motion, and motion creates the feeling that something is being addressed. But none of it confronts the actual question. Is the core offer something people genuinely want? That's the only question that matters, and it's the last one that gets asked, because it's the one that could require starting over. So the activity continues. The busyness provides cover, and the real problem stays safely unexamined, beneath a very full calendar. This isn't stupidity. The mind is simply choosing the pain it knows, exhaustion, over the pain it doesn't, uncertainty. Here's the part most people miss. We don't just value results. We value the feeling of effort. Studies show people consistently rate outcomes as more satisfying when they required more work to achieve, even when the outcomes were identical. The struggle itself created perceived value. This is called the labor illusion, and it means we're not just rewarded for busyness by our own brains. We're rewarded for it. Socially, the person who works 15 hours is treated as more serious than the person who works 6. Even if the person working 6 produced more that actually mattered. We've collectively confused input with output, and we've been quietly congratulating each other for it. The pattern, once you see it, is hard to unsee. The meetings that could have been emails, the tasks that migrated from last week's list to this week's, without anyone asking whether they still mattered. The way a full calendar feels like evidence of a life well spent, even when the fullness itself is the problem. Busyness feels like progress because the brain is wired to reward movement, because stopping creates space for uncomfortable questions, because effort has become identity, and because we live in a culture that conflates hours with value. None of these are character flaws. They're patterns, predictable, understandable, completely human patterns. The quietest and most productive people you'll ever encounter tend to share one habit. They stop regularly to ask a question most people are too busy to ask. Not, what do I need to do today? But, does what I'm doing actually matter? Those are not the same question. One keeps the machine running. The other asks whether the machine is pointed anywhere worth going. Busyness will always feel like progress. That's the default, the pattern. The question is whether you notice it often enough. To do something different. If you want to notice these patterns sooner, you'll find them here. Same calm, same questions worth asking.